While we were off the record over lunch, we did go ahead and mark 2 exhibits that we expect to be used later today. Those are A4NR 18 and SC 25.
Can I just identify SC 25 for the record, please?
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, in the morning session, there was some questioning of Mr. Perez.
Right.
Please, no side discussions. We are on the record. All right, go ahead, Mr. Weiss.
There was questioning of Mr. Perez about a written document constituting a Unit 3 long-term layout plan. Mr. Perez indicated he had a copy with him. This document that's been marked for identification as Exhibit 25, as is indicated on the cover page, is dated January 30, 2013. It's revision 8. So there were earlier versions of this document developed in the course of 2012. This is the one this is actually a PowerPoint summary of the plan. This is the document that Mr. Perez happens to have with him, and so this is a document we've marked for identification in response to your request.
Okay, since that was a response to my request, I just want to be clear. So this would be an evolution of the preservation plan that was referenced in his testimony and that I asked about. So this might not be identical, but it's similar and evolved.
That is my understanding, Your Honor, and certainly the witness or Mr. Palmisano could answer more questions along those lines if you wish.
Thank you.
Your Honor, did it distribute it?
Yeah, it will be momentarily. I'm sorry, they're still making copies right now. I apologize.
And Mr. Giesman, we'll come back to you and have you identify your exhibit when you start your cross, okay? All right. Mr. Perez, just to quickly remind you, you're still under oath, and we're going to go back to Mr. Shopson for some further cross-examination. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to take just a couple minutes to talk about the high-pressure turbine. So if I could direct your attention to your Exhibit 10, page 8, and the chart on page 94 of your Exhibit 4.
Let's go off the record for just a moment to let everybody get their material. I'll go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just want to make sure I understand this. On page 94 of Exhibit 10, near the bottom of the chart, there's a line, U2 high-pressure turbine, etc. Do you see that line?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And the that's $7 million and change?
$7,075,000.
Okay, and then there's a date that is March 2nd of 2012, indicates it's a project closing date. What does project closing date mean in that regard?
That date reflects that the project is completed to the point of being ready for service.
Okay, and as I understand the testimony, the project was replacing 2 of the HPTs, correct?
The Unit 2 project was replacing just the Unit 2 high-pressure turbine.
Thank you. And that would correspond to page 7 of your Exhibit 10, about 3/4 of the way down, the line that says U2 high-pressure turbine retrofit project, correct?
That's correct.
And so we would read across that line and we would see the amounts incurred for that replacement by month, correct?
Correct.
And that would total the $7 million and change that would also correspond with the $7 million and change that's in 94, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So later on in your testimony, on page 112, you talk about the HPT for Unit 3. Correct?
Yes.
And as I understand it, and I just want to make sure I understand this correctly, That would correspond then to page 10 on Exhibit 10. The last line, H3 high-pressure turbine.
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm sorry, as I read this text on page 112, it seems to indicate that there was, you postponed doing this work in Unit 3, correct?
Correct.
Based on your continuing analysis, I think is the word you use, the phrase you use.
That's correct.
What does continuing analysis mean?
It's continuing analysis of the situation with respect to the steam generators, so the outage at Unit 3.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
The analysis is with respect to the steam generator condition.
Okay, and who does that analysis?
Edison does with its consultants.
Okay, is there a particular group that does this analysis? Or a team, or are they identified in some way?
Well, the entire analysis is a lot of the folks at the plant, San Onofre, believe the engineering organization has a lead to perform the analysis.
Okay. Do they produce any documents?
With respect to what?
Their analysis.
They typically do, yes.
Have you seen those analyses?
For what?
For what we were just talking about.
Okay, they produce, like I said, they produce a lot of analyses. If you're talking about the analyses of the steam generator condition, those documents for Unit 3 I have not seen. For Unit 2, I believe that they exist in a significant number of locations, such as the NRC, as well as documents that we have put onto our website for the OII.
Do you know if those analyses look at various options available to Edison?
I have not seen the analyses for Unit 3.
You've seen them for Unit 2?
Yes.
Thank you. And then if we follow on page 10 of Edison 10, the last line, similar to the page 7, you would follow along and see the amounts incurred by month. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the total would be just under $9 million. Is that correct?
$8,963,000 for 2012.
Why was more spent on postponed work than what was spent on work that was done?
You're looking just at the particular year. If you take a look at the rest of the cash flow for Unit 3, $15 million had been spent in the prior years, whereas on the other project for Unit 2, we had spent $29,600,000. So the Unit 3 project was lagging the Unit 2 project because it requires an outage to be able to complete the installation of that project.
I'm not understanding what you mean by the lag and the amount that was spent the year before. How does that relate to what was spent in 12?
The Unit 2 high-pressure turbine project started before the Unit 3 project started. And therefore, the cash flow recorded that you see here reflect that situation.
Why does that make it more expensive in the year that you don't do the work?
There were progress payments required to the vendor for material or other milestones as per the contract that had to be paid, and that we determined we should not terminate that contract.
I'm looking along that line on page 10, and I'm seeing, for example, in June and in August, higher numbers than, say, April and December. Why is that? Why is there such a big difference month to month?
Again, they would be progress payments to the vendor to complete the material delivery of that high-pressure turbine.
Were those contracts cancelable?
I did not look at the contract to determine the terms and conditions.
I take it that that means you don't know if they were cancelable?
I do not know.
Thank you very much, Your Honors. Thank you, Mr. Perez.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You want a short break before you?
We can just go for it.
All right. Off the record?
We have the...
And now, Mr. Owens, I understand you have some redirect for Mr. Perez, and just a reminder, keep that focused on the scope of the costs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Perez, how you doing?
Great.
All right. I wanted to start out with rounding out your portfolio a little bit. You mentioned some of the facilities that you're in charge of, or not in charge of, but are within your portfolio. Can you talk about a couple of the other ones that we didn't mention?
There were a couple I didn't mention yesterday. One is Palo Verde, and the other one are the peakers that were installed in the Southern California area to provide summer megawatts.
So during the peak hours, is that why they're called peakers?
Yes, they are. They're combustion gas turbines that provide electricity during the peak hours.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask you some clarification questions on Exhibit 10. So I think there's been testimony earlier that the numbers, as I'll call them, in Exhibit 10, that they came from SCE4, correct?
That's correct.
Is there one exception to that?
Yes, there is.
And what page is that exception on?
That is page 12 of SCE 10, and these are the costs related to the steam generator project. The detailed information for that table for page 12 is in SCE 6, Appendix A.
And to be clear, Mr. Perez, this page 12, this was in response to the commission order of April 20th, 2013?
That's correct.
And then one other question for you, again, about the nature of Exhibit 10. The chronology that appears at the end, just so we're clear on the record, all of the dates that appear in the chronology, do all of those dates appear in SCE4?
No, they do not.
There were some added for that chronology, is that right?
That's correct.
I also wanted to clarify with you your testimony about T-cold. You recall you were asked some questions about T-C-O-L-D?
Yes, I do.
And go ahead and clarify what you were trying to explain yesterday about returning versus exiting.
T-cold is the temperature of the reactor coolant as it enters the reactor vessel.
And I think yesterday you said the opposite in a sense of that.
Correct. I had it reversed. I had that as the temperature of the reactor coolant entering the steam generator.
And to be fair, I think you said you're not an expert on T-cold, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, I now want to turn to some of the questions that Mr. Giesman asked you. And if you recall, I think that might have been losing track of time, Your Honor, may have been Monday, when you were asked some questions by Mr. Giesman. Page 97 of SCE4, you recall some questions being asked about what other steam generators were being used to prepare the 2C17 degradation assessment?
Yes, I do.
And have you had an opportunity to go back and to talk about, to better answer some of Mr. Giesman's questions on that topic?
Yes, I have.
Please do so.
The steam generators, the plants that we looked at for their steam generators were Prairie Island, Callaway, DC Cook, Millstone, Davis Bessie, Watts Bar Unit 2, Braidwood Unit 1, Sharon Harris, Byron Unit 2, Byron Unit 1, Waterford, Palo Verde, South Texas Unit 1, and Surrey Unit 1.
Thank you. Now, sir, do you also recall some questions about page 80 of your testimony about tube wear projections?
Yes, I do.
And again, have you had some opportunity to go back and address those questions?
Yes.
First, in terms of generally the expectation for the service life of the steam generators, did you get a chance to focus on that question?
Yes, I did.
What can you tell us?
Looking at the contract, we required a 40-year service life for the steam generators.
So an expectation of 40 years.
That's correct.
And how about specifics on the degradation assessment? Did you learn more information about that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
We directed the vendor that was preparing for the inspection and repair of the Unit 2 steam generators to be prepared to plug 10 tubes in the steam generators, even though we were expecting no tubes to be plugged during that outage.
Now, sir, you also have been asked over a couple different days about the high-pressure turbine. Now, first, is it turbine or turbine?
Either way, I say turbine.
Okay, then I'll say it the way you say it. So for the high-pressure turbine, just so we're clear, that project was initiated long before there were any concerns about tube wear, correct?
That's correct.
Your Honor, I'm sorry. That's about the fifth leading question.
That's within the scope of the cross-examination, because there was a series of questions about what was the reasoning for the HPT and would it have been initiated if there was not going to be the need for excess capacity. Sorry, that was on my watch.
That's fine.
I agree that it's within the scope. The problem that I have is that the attorney is suggesting the answer in the question.
All right. Mr. Owens, can you rephrase the question?
I'm happy to rephrase. Sir, in the last 24 hours, have you learned more information about the high-pressure turbine?
Yes, I have.
Can you please tell us, in terms of timing, what you learned?
That project was initiated way before the Unit 2 Cycle 17 outage started, and obviously way before we knew that there were problems with the steam generators on either unit.
I'd now like to turn to a concept called maintenance redeployment. Are you familiar with a concept called maintenance redeployment as it played out at SONGS?
No, not really, not yet.
Let me rephrase the question this way. Are you familiar with any practice at SONGS about if certain maintenance workers were not available because of a certain situation at Unit 2 or Unit 3, they might be used in a different capacity?
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
Certain workers that would otherwise be contracted to perform reactor disassembly, we used Edison employees for those activities.
Thank you. I'd now like to turn to some of the questions that the commission had for you. And do you recall questions about what components were not safety related concerning the turbine plant cooling water system?
Yes.
And do you have more information on that?
Yes, I do. The turbine plant cooling water system has several components to it and provides cooling to the turbine main lube oil coolers, main feed water pump lube oil coolers, heater drain tank pump seal and motor coolers, condensate pump motor bearing coolers, generator stator water coolers, main exciter air cooler, generator seal oil vacuum pump, generator seal oil coolers, instrument air compressor coolers, steam generator primary and secondary sample coolers, and generator hydrogen gas coolers.
Now also, the commission had some questions for you. Page 79. let me clarify my last question. The list you just read, were those components that were safety related or not safety related?
These are the non-safety related components that are cooled by the TPCW.
Thank you. Now, also earlier today, you were asked, I think it was at SC4 at 79, what were the criteria for identifying certain tubes, whether they need to be replaced or plugged?
Yes.
Did you learn more information about that?
Yes, I did.
What can you tell us?
We have a criteria of required plugging at greater than 35% tube wear. Between 30 and 35% wear, there is a recommendation to plug the tubes, which we did. There is also a industry practice for plugging preventively to the tube wear, and we also preventatively plugged tubes at the retainer bars. We also stabilized tubes. That is an engineering judgment as far as stabilizing them. We stabilized all of the tubes that we preventatively plugged that exhibited tube-to-tube wear.
And do you recall earlier today on the same, or actually page 83 of the same testimony, some questions about nitrogen detection?
Yes.
And what can you tell us more now that you couldn't tell us before?
That system was installed, or is being installed as a result of the steam generator leak on Unit 3. It is an industry standard type of a system, and installation of this system, if there is a leak, would allow for a lower level of leakage and therefore a lower amount of release of radioactive material into the atmosphere. So the operators can detect leaks earlier with the system in place.
And now if you could, Mr. Perez, turn to page 94 of your testimony. And do you recall some questions about this table on page 94?
Yes.
And just to, we want to be clear about something. When there was testimony about events being related to an outage, these description of items that were on this page 94, when you were talking about related to the outage, does that mean that they were but-for caused by the outage? Or what did you mean by that?
They were not caused by the outage. Completion of these projects needed an outage to be able to do the final tie-ins and finalization of the system. Interties.
What was the last word? I'm sorry.
Interties.
Thank you.
One moment, Your Honor, if I could.
Off the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. Also, just to help me understand something, there's been the word shutdown has been used at different times during testimony. And also the concept of outage has been used at different times in the testimony. When you're talking about during the time period that Unit 2 or Unit 3 was shut down, can you clarify what you mean? Does that mean shut down like decommissioned? Or does it mean there's an outage? Can you explain that a little bit?
I certainly do not mean the decommissioning aspect. It is in an outage. In fact, on Unit 2, I believe we talked over the last couple of days of the unit being in an extended refueling outage, and we consider Unit 3 to be in the same situation. It's in an outage, not in a shutdown mode.
There were some other questions, this is directed to the court, there were some other questions that I know the two commissioners had, and we intended, two ALJs had, maybe someday, right now. And so we do intend to bring Mr. Perez back to address those questions later on today, or later on this week or next week, whenever that would be.
Okay, very good.
Nothing more, thank you.
All right. So I think we're ready for recross. Do we have off-the-record kind of questions, or no? And I was going to propose that we do recross in the same order that we did the original cross, which would start with Mr. Shapson, if you're ready.
I'd like to go to the end of the line if I could.
Okay. Mr. Giesman, a volunteer. And just a reminder to everyone, please keep recross focused on the redirect.
Mr. Perez, you identified a list of either reactors or plants that you had used as the universe for comparison in your degradation assessment. How many steam generators were represented on that list?
There were 14 units. I'm not completely sure of how many steam generators each of these plants has.
But 14 plants then.
I refer to them as units or reactors.
14 units. Do you have A4NR Exhibit 1 accessible to you?
All right, let's go off the record.
Do you remember we talked about this on Monday?
Yes.
Of the 14 units that you've just identified in your redirect, how many of those 14 are represented on the 4 units identified in A4NR Exhibit 1?
Comparing the list here in this exhibit to the units that I identified, only Waterford is on both lists. However, I believe that this data request question was asking for different information.
This data request was asking for the population of units that Edison had used in referring to industry operating experience for wear rates. Is that not correct?
Well, it also talks about FEI and how it decreases over time, whereas the population that I discussed are the units that were used to develop the degradation assessment, which goes to, as defined in the testimony, how and what we should be looking for with respect to wear at the first inspection of the steam generators.
Is there some reason why the universe, for comparative purposes, wouldn't be the same?
I don't know what the universe would have been for this data request response, so I can't answer your question.
Thank you very much.
All right. Others for recross? Ms. Venskis, I think you had raised your hand earlier.
Please define outage.
Outage is when producing electricity, or in the case of a reduction in power, well, that's not an outage. So it's the time from when the breakers are open till the time that the breakers are closed.
And in the context of the songs, what do you mean by the breaker? Can you be more specific?
Mr. Keesman, would you mind giving your microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So in the context of songs, Unit 2 and 3, what do you mean by, well, let me ask you this. How would you describe songs Unit 2 and 3 at this particular point in time?
They are in outages.
Okay. And so can you define shutdown, please? Can you define shutdown, please?
Shutdown, in my definition, would be that the plant is in a state that would not necessarily be ready for restart at a quick turnaround time frame.
Is Unit 3 in shutdown mode?
No, it's in an extended outage.
Is it ready to be restarted anytime soon?
It is in a layup state where systems can be put into operation rather quickly, not immediately.
And if it's shut down, under your definition, how long would it take to put the plant back in startup mode?
I don't think I have a time frame in my mind, but it would be a lot more than in a extended outage.
But you don't have a time frame. You can't give me a general time frame.
I don't have one in mind.
Okay. And please define decommission.
Decommissioning has a specific definition in the NRC's regulations. Decommissioning is when the NRC operating license is either expired and the plant will no longer be used to generate electricity, or that an operator has decided to retire the unit to no longer produce electricity.
Does the NRC have a specific definition of shutdown?
I don't know.
Does the NRC have a specific definition of outage?
There may be, but I don't have it here.
Okay. No further questions.
All right. Who else would like to do recross? All right, Ms. Sullivan? Or Mr. Lutz?
According to, is this on? Yeah. According to the NRC technical specifications for this plant, there's a listing of modes of operation. Are you familiar with these modes?
Yes, I am. I'm familiar with the modes.
I'm not asking the questions, Council.
Okay, what are the modes?
It's cross.
There's modes 1 through 6 and defueled.
And are there names associated with each one of those numbers?
Yes, there are.
Can you list each one of the numbers and what the modes are called?
Mode 1 is power operation. Mode 2 is startup. Mode 3 is hot standby. 4 is hot shutdown. 5 is cold shutdown. 6 is refueling. And like I mentioned earlier, defueled.
So the NRC does have a definition for the term shutdown then?
As it relates to a mode number.
So which modes would be considered shutdown?
As defined by the NRC, it would be hot shutdown mode 4 and cold shutdown is mode 5.
What are the conditions of the two units right now in terms of the NRC definitions for shutdown that you just enumerated?
Unit 3 is defueled and Unit 2 is in mode 5.
So these units are actually below the shutdown mode according to the NRC, isn't that right? Their numbers higher than the shutdown? They're not. So their start at full operation is 0. 1 is, what is that one again?
1 is power operation.
Power. 1 is power, then 2 is starting, right? Restart.
2 is startup.
Yeah, startup. And as you get higher in number, it means it's further and further away from actually running until you're in refueling is the lowest number.
Well, the lowest number is refueling, and one that is numbered is defueled.
Okay. So these two units, the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, are nowhere near even being shut down, according to the NRC definition. They're not even close to being in an outage condition. Isn't it right that they're down to defueled? Isn't Unit 3 in a defueled mode?
Unit 3 is in a defueled mode. Mode 6 is refueling, which is considered an outage, as I explained earlier.
So, Mr. Lutz, this seems like we've steered into 2013. Can we?
Well, they're using, they're using definitions that they said they didn't understand the definitions from the NRC, and in fact they do. So I'd like to make it known that they're not willing to answer the question about this mode of operation that everyone else in the room seems to know. Thank you.
It's actually referenced in their timeline.
All right. Please, no statements from the council table. This is about asking questions to the witness. All right. Others who would like to do recross? Anyone else? All right. Hearing none?
I had one question.
Okay. Go ahead, Judge.
Which may have been answered, but on this issue of the distinction between an outage and shutdown, did I understand you to say that it's a matter of whether there's a quick turnaround to the difference that you're using that term as it related to 2012, that whether the plant's in shutdown or outage depends upon whether there's a quick turnaround available to restart?
Correct.
And are you able to quantify that in any way? Like, for example, if it's in a shutdown, does it take a month longer or a week longer to start up than if it's in an outage mode?
No quantification, but it'd be a matter of the types of preservation or continuing maintenance that you're performing on the unit. In a shutdown condition, we would expect very little to any maintenance being performed on a unit other than that required specifically to maintain the integrity of the fuel. You wouldn't be paying attention to the secondary side of the plant with respect to degradation of systems and components.
Thank you.
Very good. So,
Can you just go off the record for a second?
off the record.
I wanted to apologize.
Mr. Owens, would you like another redirect?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Perez, I think we will let you step down for the moment, but we expect to see you again this hearing. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And now let's go off the record and get Mr. Palmisano ready.
Thank you. Our next witness is Mr. Thomas Palmisano.
Okay. All right, Mr. Palmisano, please rise and we'll start again. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that all of the testimony you are about to make in this hearing will be true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Weissman or Mr. Owens, please introduce the witness and include in that a statement of what he is here to testify on.
Will do. Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Palmisano, and welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
I'd like to start by directing you to SCE 9, and toward the back there's a statement of witness qualifications. So if you could find that, I believe it's page 5 of the witness qualifications in SCE 9.
Yes, I have that.
And is this statement of your qualifications accurate and complete?
Yes, it is.
Could you, just by way of background, tell us a little bit about when did you first start working for the Edison Company?
I joined Southern California Edison in December 2011.
And what are your general responsibilities at Edison?
I am the Vice President of Engineering, Projects, and Site Support. So generally, I'm responsible for all engineering activities related to San Onofre, for the implementation of assigned projects in our projects group, and for the site support function, which is a variety of responsibilities ranging from office facilities maintenance to interface with the information technology group, the communications group, things like that. A variety of miscellaneous responsibilities.
And specifically in 2012, what responsibilities did you have with respect to the outages at the facility?
With respect to the outages, with the start of the planned refueling outage for Unit 2, for all the engineering support and implementation of a number of the projects for the Unit 2 refueling outage, and then with the tube leak in Unit 3 and the subsequent steam generator work in both units, I've been responsible for the engineering piece of the restart activities for Unit 2, the analysis of the causes in Unit 2 and Unit 3, and the long-term steam generator repair team is also my responsibility for the technical work.
Very good. Okay, I'd like now to ask you to turn to what's been marked for identification as SCE 10, And in the back of SCE 10, starting on page 64, there's a 3-page chronology of events. Do you have that in front of you?
I don't know if I have SCE 10, just 1 minute.
Could we be off the record for just a second?
And off the record.